There are some people you admire for their skill, for their talent, for their work ethic, and you look at them and say, could I be a little bit more of that person? After all these years in broadcasting, the person I'm going to speak to today embodies all those qualities. That's Ian Bishop. When I started this YouTube channel, a lot of people said you must have conversations with people they'd want to hear from. And for some reason, they said, we want to hear what happens in commentary boxes. We want to know what other commentators think about. And so I said, okay, who? And it's incredible. And I'm not saying that because he's right there in frame at the moment. But Bish, it's incredible how many people said Ian Bishop. And I know you're widely respected as broadcasters. The word respect, at least to me, means a lot more than popular means. But do you have any idea how popular you are in our part of the world?
Harsha, thank you very much for having me, and hello to your viewers. It's immeasurable, really. But, I'm thankful that there are a few people that appreciate the work that we all do. And for me, the broadcasting thing is all about the viewership and those listening in. So really, really thankful to be in this industry.
I'll tell you what people like, which is what the thrust of this conversation is going to be, in that Bish is measured, Bish is dignified, Bish is always prepared. If a young player comes in, if a Rizvi comes in or a Thakur comes in, Bish knows things about them. If he's doing the Under-19 World Cup, Bish knows things about them. So people love the fact that you're prepared. And so I thought I'd start from that area because for some of you who are young enough, I've got friends who were on the 89 tour of the West Indies and they said, yes, they were all fast, but Bish was the one we were terrified of. So as a player, the pedigree is impeccable for Ian Bishop. Tendulkar once forced the selectors to pick him in a game because he said, I've heard so much about Ian Bishop, I want to play Ian Bishop. So the playing pedigree is impeccable. Bish, how much of an advantage was it for you when the back and the knee and other things came in the way and you got into broadcasting, that you had that level of experience as an elite player?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it was so long ago. And you talk about Sachin Tendulkar. I wonder if that was the time that he hit me up into a tree to win the game. When
I thought you might remember that, but there was a lot more to it.
It's one I never forgot, actually. Look, coming into broadcasting, it was not my plan to get into it. I've always said once I finished playing, I wanted to get as far away from cricket as possible, and I just jumped straight back into it with both feet. I don't know why that happened. And I suppose it taught me a lot about, as you said, trying to be the best representation of myself and the people that I am employed with, to try to bring that on the screen and to the people in their living rooms and via technology. So again, it helps, but I did not rely on that. I went back to do a master's degree about 5, 6, 7 years into my broadcasting career because I didn't want to rely on playing only.
And you never finished it, did you?
I did.
Well
I
done.
did a master's degree. Not the law. I started the law and I didn't finish the law, but I did complete my master's in communications in 2005, 6. Because to me, that's a big thing. It was a big thing. I did not, in any way, shape, or form, whatever I did post-cricket, I did not want to rely only on cricket as my form of qualification. Although it opened the door for me, I definitely did not want to fully rely on it.
Yeah, I was referring to the law degree that we talked about a while. I might have mentioned that's the only thing you and Sangakkara probably have in common, other than impeccable cricket playing careers. But tell me, sometimes players who've had very good careers, when they get into broadcasting, it's always the second career, isn't it? It's very difficult to give to broadcasting what you gave to your career as a player. Many people have told me you can never create the same intensity that you did as a player as a broadcaster. And my own gut feel is, if you can give 70% of what you did as a player to a broadcaster, you're actually doing pretty well. Do you, for example, find you give the same intensity to broadcasting as you did when you were lining up, knowing the batter in front of you is scared?
Wow. Phew. I hope so. I hope so from the point of view, and it's a good question. And I don't know how you feel about the industry itself and draw reference to your past as well. But I'm very intense.
How do you know?
And my wife, very intense. And my wife often sort of goes at me because I sometimes bring my work home with me quite a lot. I'm kind of a perfectionist in many respects, from the way that I try to dress, the way that I grow my kids, and in most that I do. So while it's a different intensity, because as a player, I'd get a 5-wicket haul, and as soon as I got home, I was thinking about how to get the next 5-wicket haul, and she would be going at me. You don't enjoy what you've just done enough. You're always thinking of the next one ahead. And I think similarly with broadcasting, Harsha, I don't know if your experience is the same, but after a day's play, I'm always sort of going over it to try to find out, could I have said this better? Could I have done this differently, so that if the situation comes up again, I'm prepared for that?
I mean, this program's about you, not about me, but since you brought it up, if I've had a good day and I come back and I start to think, yeah, wow, I had a good day, I'm so worried that I'll get overconfident, that I'll turn up for the next day thinking, oh, I've had a great day, that I'll spoil my next day. So much like you, I've never really allowed myself to enjoy what I think is a good day. But in any case, at our level, it's very difficult to know if it's a good day, because you do make 4 or 5 mistakes in a day. Everybody does. Bish makes fewer than others, but you make mistakes, and sometimes you keep thinking of that. But you talked about the intensity, Bish, and the kind of person you are. And I've always wanted to ask you this. I've hardly ever seen you angry. I've hardly ever seen you lose it. I might have seen you on the edge once, but I've hardly ever seen that. Is the person you are, does that manifest into the broadcaster that you become? So, for example, for people who don't know, Bish is deeply religious. So, and it's not surprising. There's a bishop in his name and there's a Raphael in his name. So there's an angel and a bishop both in his name. So is the fact that you're very much a man of religion, does that give you the calm that we see on the screen?
I thought you were going to call me a Ninja Turtle there for a minute.
You are among the more angelic people in the box, I can tell you.
On a serious note, though, I think that I am more interested in people as a Christian, and that is the center of who I am, right? And my first focus is living by my faith, and that would involve helping as many people as possible in my own little sphere of activity and my own world. Myself, my wife, who comes from a family of born-again believers and pastors, so we have that first call to our lives. And so in my job, and that is why I'm sort of always intrigued by finding out the background of the young players, the background of the players, and not just the numbers, because I want to know what their family is like. I want to know what their upbringing is like. And yes, it does, to a large extent, inform what I do on screen, because every time I go to say something, I stop and I think, his mom is going to hear this. His wife is going to hear this. His daughter or his sister is going to hear this. How does that appeal to his family? In much the same way as when I was a player, my wife sort of lived a lot of moments with me. So I have taken that with me wherever I've gone. So even if I have to be analytical about a player, always try to phrase it in a way that his family and friends are watching it. And that is the most important thing. And then the job comes in.
Bish, you have no idea how happy that makes me feel. I remember a friend of mine once said, when people were being critical of me, he said, but when he criticizes people, it sounds like it's a marriage proposal. And
Right.
I mean, I know we've got to be objective. So how do you marry being objective if a player is not playing well? How do you marry being objective with the person that you are that doesn't want to hurt an individual, and yet you have to be critical of a performance?
Well, look, Harsha, and look, every broadcaster is different, right? And you know this as well as anyone else. And there are groups and segments of viewers and listeners who gravitate towards a certain type of narrative and broadcast. I know my great friend Michael Holding, who was a mentor to me when I was a player, who was a mentor to me when I got into broadcasting, and who was a great friend and older brother to me. He's very straight down the line. People all know he doesn't mince words. But for me, I believe that when I was a player, no one had to shout at me to say, Bish, I need some energy here, or I need you to train harder to do this. Nobody had to tell me that. I was very critical of my own performance. I'm very aware. And it's the same thing as a broadcaster. If Harsha Bhogle played a poor shot, I think there's a way that I can say that wasn't great. That is something that he'll regret. That was poor, but he might learn from it and he might get better. So there's a way to couch, I think, criticism, to be straight up with it, but also not to be too vitriolic, where it pulls down the integrity of the broadcast.
So you've never had a player ever coming up to you saying, Bish, I didn't like what you said about me?
Oh, it's happened often. I've lost a few friends. Yeah. Yeah.
You've lost friends, Bish.
Friends.
I only thought you made them.
No. I remember one instance, very well-known left-arm spinner, but he had a temper. And he would keep losing his temper on the field, and he would confront opposition players, and he would almost shoulder to shoulder them and, use language on the field. And time and again, coming through the system, he had to be sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? He had to be spoken to and admonished. And after doing it a few times in international cricket, at one point it became so embarrassing, something he did. I had to say straight up, you cannot continue exhibiting that type of behavior. That's poor. Because
is that all you said?
Getting himself in. So yeah, that was basically what I said. And so he confronted me one time at a function, accusing me of not liking him and all of that. And I just stood there and I just said, no, that's not the case. I disagree with your behavior, and you represent a lot of people, kind of thing. And so you have to be a better sort of representation of them. So, I mean, it's happened and it will happen. That's one thing I'll say to any broadcaster. It will happen where at times you have to analyze, not necessarily criticize. And being a former player myself, the player may not like it, but once you can reason with it, I have found that over time, they come to appreciate you.
Just let me go a little bit away from broadcasting, which is the main theme of what we are talking about, to go back to your era as players. One of the reasons players from the Caribbean are so naturally liked in India, we just love, we have a very natural affinity to players from the Caribbean. And part of the reason is the way they carry themselves. And you use the word admonish, you're very careful with your choice of words. But there was one conversation we had where you used a word that was very dear to me when the topic of sledging arose. And sort of telling a batter what you think and snarling and doing. And the word you used was reprehensible. I'd love to get your thoughts, because you've been in situations where people are saying fairly nasty things. Why did the West Indies never, ever in the prime, ever say things to batters? I mean, Sunil Gavaskar, who faced a lot, said, if you could withstand Andy Roberts' stare, you did not need any words.
What I will say is that all of those gentlemen that we can call there, I mean, we've spoken about Mikey, right? And you know Mikey well.
Mikey's an outstanding person.
Yes. Andy was my first real coach when he finished playing in the early 80s. I can't remember if it was against India, his last series was. He came to Trinidad and he coached me, and since then we've stayed in touch, right? So that's also like another mentor. Malcolm I played with, and Joel I know a little bit more of. And I can tell you, apart from Malcolm, who is very, God rest his soul, the late Malcolm Marshall, is very chirpy. He could go sometimes with the best of them, but the other gentleman is just how we grew up, I think, in the Caribbean. We have a respect for other people. I think it comes from almost a religious background with many people in the Caribbean, where you mind your language. And Andy's a very quiet man. And we prefer, Secretary Ambrose himself, not short of a word, but when he's on the field, we prefer to let actions speak louder than words. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing for that generation, because there's a new generation now who doesn't back down from the Caribbean. So I won't say it's everybody, but certainly that generation, along with Kirkley and one or two others, we believed in letting the work tell the story.
Now, let's come back to broadcasting. You talked about how, because of your upbringing, you want to know about players and you want to know their backgrounds, their families. I've seen the amount of research that you do. And if you can take Bish off, because you're going to be slightly embarrassed by what I'm going to say now.
Right.
Sometimes, even after being many years in a profession, you still have role models for certain qualities that people possess. And I've had role models for work ethic. I mean, someone like Ian Chappell, who temperamentally was very different from Bish, but he was my role model in professional work ethic. But I walked into the commentary box one day, Bish, and I've told this story a couple of times. I walked into a commentary box one day in Abu Dhabi, and there was Lisa Starekar on the left, and there's Ian Bishop on the right. I walked in, and Lisa in with her iPad, and Bish still with his notebook. And I saw the extent of preparation that was going on, and a voice inside me said loudly enough, if it wasn't inside me, people have heard it, saying the world is passing you by. This is the new world. And so from that point of view, Bish, people like you, even for someone like me who's been in the profession so long, have been a beacon almost, saying, look, that is the way the world is going. And so sometimes Bish and I have this big joke. I carry my little piece of paper and say, Bish, do you know this stat? Bish, that's come out of watching you. This preparation, are you almost nervous that you've not prepared enough, even someone like you? Because I find that when I'm over-prepared, I'm actually nervous.
Right. Oh, right. Okay, that's an interesting point. I'd like to know about that. No, I like, as I said, the more that I know, the more fulfilled that I feel. And that's just about life, right? That's not just about broadcasting. It's not just about people, it's about life. Because if I didn't play cricket as a profession, one of the reasons I went to do the master's degree was because I wanted to teach eventually. I wanted to say lecture at university if I were able to achieve that.
If I could interrupt, what did you want to teach? Was it religion? Was it...
Funnily enough, my wife has me doing a theological course now, so I'm sort of preparing for that. It would have been English, and eventually, once I did broadcasting for a while, I wanted to be able to also move into that field in that industry because it was what I came to know. So it's just, it's my personal thing, Harsha. If I am doing a series or a game or a tournament, if I don't know about all the players, I feel unprepared. I feel disheveled. And it has happened sometimes where it's too much to cover. But if I'm coming to work and I haven't done my work, I always feel there is something else that I haven't researched. And the thing is, if I don't write it down, it does not commit to memory. So when you see me writing, it's not because I'm trying to look studious, but because the more I write, it's now because I don't necessarily have to read it, but it commits to memory whenever I write it out. So that's just my personal thing. And Pami and I, and yes, what you do with the notes, every day he comes into the commentary box with his little notepad and he says, Bish, look at mine, and calls out a number. And I like that because it lightens the workplace.
Bish, you don't have to ever worry about looking too studious, because I've sometimes looked at you and think, was this really the person who induced fear in opposition batters? But yeah, since you mentioned being over-prepared, sometimes there is a tendency when you've prepared a lot to say, let me show my preparation. And you've got to guard against that as a broadcaster, because you've got to wait for the moment. Your preparation must show, Bish, as I've learned from you, your preparation must show very lightly in the offhand comment that you make. You can't almost bludgeon people with your preparation. And sometimes I've found that if I've over-prepared, I'm almost too eager to show what I've prepared. So I find I've got to be cautious if I've prepared too much. But there's one other thing, Bish, and that's something for my generation, but increasingly it will happen to someone of your generation too, which is to understand the next generation, to understand that their approach to life, to approach to thinking is different. They play the game differently. They look at life differently. And you cannot go back and say, but this is how it used to be in my time. We need to respect the newer generation as well. I'm going to pick up a line that you said. You say, I try every year to add something. I try not to be stuck in my era, but understand the current era that I am in, the current game, the T20 aspect, and to grow with it. Tell me a little bit about that.
I have to be careful what I say, or you keep remembering all this stuff from so many years ago.
No, my producer sent it to me. I'll be very honest.
All right. He's a good man. He's reminding me of things I said too. Look, I have a growth mindset. Again, I've long, even when I started playing, I was always thinking about the end result way before I got halfway through my career. What did I want to do next? Which I didn't come to terms with. What was I wearing during my career? Like, we had a little bracelet everybody used to have. And a few years into my career, I said, is this what you're going to be wearing when you finish playing cricket and you're 30-something? Why are you wearing it now? And I just got rid of it. And I recognize, as we all do, that generations move on. And if I stay stuck in my own ways, in the way that I dress, cars that I drive, that I drove way back, have changed and evolved to what they are now. And it's hard to exactly keep up, because my 14-year-old daughter knows things about computers that I don't think I could ever know. And she hasn't learned this anywhere. She just gravitates to want to. So that tells me I won't necessarily be up to equilibrium with some generations, but the more that I can keep learning about the game, accept where the game was and where the game is going, then at least I'll be able to understand and convey the stories to the viewer and the listener in a much better way. But more importantly, I want to learn. So I'll sit down with Pollard, I'll sit down with Bravo, I'll sit down with Nicholas Puran. Every time I go home, Phil Simmons, who's coaching, Tom Moody, who's coaching, and we just talk cricket, Otis Gibson, because I want to know more about the game. I'm intrigued by it. And those guys don't understand how it replenishes my knowledge about the game. And shout out to Lisa Staleka, because you mentioned her there, and she was the one that got me into the iPad note keeping. And I love working with her as an example, because we challenge each other. She comes with, when we sit in those little corners, as you talked about in Dubai, she'll say, what about this aspect of the game? I think this aspect of the game. And then I'd sort of throw my own thing in, and then she'd agree or disagree. So I love working with her for that reason, that she makes all of us around her be the best version of ourselves. Don't come to work unprepared, because she is very prepared.
I'm scared of her. I promise you, we do a lot on Crickbuzz. I once asked English player, a player from England, I said, Lisa's a friend of mine. How was she to play against? And she said, in one word, feisty.
Wow.
And I keep reminding Lisa of that. But since we're on the subject of preparation and whatever, where do you stand on the increasing use of analytics? I know you love analytics, I will tell all of you watching this that the one genuine friend that the Hawkeye crew has is Bish, because Bish is always there, always talking to Hawkeye, saying, can you show me this? Can you show me this? Is there something else you found over there? What are these lengths? What are these strike rates here? Bish loves the people working with Hawkeye. And I can imagine they probably replenish your knowledge and your awareness too. But where do you stand on use of analytics, especially because you've been a player too? Someone like me who's not been a player anywhere near at that level will have to be wedded to analytics. But someone like you has seen the difference between instinct and analytics too. Where do you stand are they arrayed against each other, instinct and analytics, or do they walk together?
We've been long enough in the game now for me to have my own sort of crystallized view on it. And I've sort of segued for a few years, but now I've arrived at a point where I've learned that certain things that we see with our eyes and certain things we think we remember, the numbers sometimes tell us differently. So I would put it this way. There are some coaches, some players who are instinctive and they don't want to be convoluted by numbers and analytics. But I date the analytics, as I said to a colleague the other day. I'm not wedded to it. I like the information it gives me, but before I wed myself to it, I want to be able to look at how it brings an advantage to different situations and only call upon it when I feel it's appropriate and it will dictate the outcome of a situation. So I won't wed myself to it to say that this is how it has to be, because as a player, you know that not every situation will come out the same action. Because for example, a matchup that was appropriate 2 years ago, or the way that a guy square cut the ball 2 years ago, he may change his strengths and add to his game, and he should. If he's a decent player, he should. So those numbers may have evolved a couple of years down. So I think you have to know the numbers, but you can't be rigid about it. It must inform you without dictating to you.
It's a very interesting thing you say, this reaction to analytics, the contemporary nature of analytics. So if you looked, say, because it's a hot topic these days, if you looked at Virat Kohli over the last 4 years, the numbers would tell you one thing about Virat Kohli. If you looked at Virat Kohli in the last 6 matches, it's a completely different person. So the analytics that were valid 4 years ago, and they were valid for a reason, may not be valid in the last 6 games. I don't know if it's the analytics that have caused him to change, but he's definitely playing a different game. So today, if you bring up those numbers, you might say, but hang on, the person I'm seeing is very different from what the numbers are saying. So you make a very valid point about how the game evolves and how we need to stay contemporary.
And can I just, as you said, that's a good example. And that's why the good captains now who have, I know one franchise who has about 3 analysts in their camp, each bringing a different thing. And that's where I've worked out that captains are fed the numbers, but because a player might change even within a tournament, the way that he plays, that's where the instinctive side of the human being and the captain now has to take over and say, I've got all these numbers, but my instinct and my eye test is telling me something different is happening here, and I have to use a different strategy.
The other thing that analytics is doing, and this is not germane to broadcasting, but we must know as broadcasters, is that a lot of younger bowlers are doing what they're told to do, rather than thinking and doing what they know they should do or what they can do. And so they're becoming slaves of knowledge. My analytics is telling me I must bowl this. My coach is telling me I must bowl this. So they'll go back to what should I bowl now? And so sometimes in situations, bowlers are at a loss for what to do, because right from the time they're 16, 17, they've followed exactly what someone has told them to do. If you meet a young player today, and I know you love talking to younger players, there's a young fast bowler who's 17, 18, is going to be a big cricketer. Would you tell that person, look at analytics, or would you say, be aware of analytics, but think your own game?
It's the same thing I would say to a young broadcaster. I would say to them, don't try to be exactly who Harsha Bhogle is. Don't try to be exactly who Michael Holding is or who Richie Beno was. But I would say equip the player, equip the young broadcaster. And that's why I made the comment the other day. My good friend Pommy mentioned it to me as well. If you get a chance to do an under-19 World Cup, if you get invited, do it, because it gives you information that you grow with the young players and you feel as though they're a part of your community, your village, right? So I would say I would arm Harsha, I would arm the young broadcaster, I would arm the young player with as many skills as possible, and then allow that player to understand when to use it and what situation to use it in. And this is where I go back to the Jasprit Bumrah situation, where I say he should be formally training or sharing his thoughts with people. He's not telling them, as you pointed out there, you asked the pertinent question on the broadcast the other night. You say, he's different. Can he teach people to bowl like him? No. He doesn't need to teach people to bowl like him. What he needs to do is to teach people the tools that are required and then allow them through experience to apply those tools in a given situation. You might tell them situations, I might tell them situations, but then it's up to them. So it's not a rigid thing. You have to do this here, no.
Since we're on the game, it's something that a lot of people have asked me too. When your team is playing, how do you keep the emotions of wanting your team to win with the professionalism of saying, I'm a neutral broadcaster. This broadcast is going all over the world. So while I want my team to do well, while I want my team to win and qualify, while I will feel disappointed if my team is not doing well, how do I still maintain that equilibrium and leave my emotions to after the game is over? And it's something that we in India have to walk a tightrope on almost. As I said, I mean, this is not about me, but people have been very critical of me, saying I do not support India enough.
Right.
But in your case, you also come from a very passionate cricket following country. So how do you manage your personal emotion about the side and the players that you hope will do well with what is happening on the field?
Yeah, I totally empathize with your experience, and I've learned from your experience a lot where that is concerned with 1 billion people, the most populous nation in the world now. My 7 million people appeals insignificantly. Look, a lot of what, and this is for your viewership, and you know this, I had to learn a lot of this stuff. I didn't start out knowing a lot of what I know now. I had to evolve through it. When I started, it was very hard for me to be critical of guys I played with. But then through experience, I had to learn to be fair to the viewer rather than to the guys that I know and the guys that I played with. And it's still sometimes a difficult situation because I know families, I know relatives of the guys, not just from West Indies, but from around the globe. And so I'm very careful, and I don't know if I get the balance right all the time. So what happens at home with me now is that people will say, I'm very critical of the West Indies team. And then people from overseas will say, I commentate like a homeboy. So when I go home, I get criticized for being anti-West Indian. And when I'm away from home, I'm getting criticized for being pro-West Indian. So I used to wonder, what should I do? But now I don't care.
I mean, I'll tell you an example. If I'm doing an RCB versus SRH game,
right,
and if I get criticized by both for being partial, then I think I've done okay. India versus Pakistan is a completely different thing. We'll talk about that another day, because that is a different kind of tightrope that
Yes.
the broadcasters got to watch, because the emotions go to another level. But I will tell all you people watching this about Bish. You might think Bish is this very calm, very level-headed. Equilibrium is the word you associate with him. Read Bish's tweets about basketball. And there is a different person. There the fan emerges. It must be
Yes.
wonderful to spend all your life being rational and allow yourself to be irrational as a spectator sometimes. But when I'm irrational watching a game, it helps me because it reminds me that the people who are watching my broadcast will also watch it irrationally. Peter Drury told me this once, the great football broadcaster. He said, we must be aware that the fan is necessarily irrational, but we will be necessarily rational.
That's great. And I envy you for having that opportunity to have met with a great man. And that's what I'm learning to, like, in social media. Like, sometimes I'll respond to some comments that I think have come across in a way that is teaching and that I can learn from. And I do it once I remember that I too am a fan and the person has a point. And if I'm wrong, I'm learning now that I'm quite happy to hold my hand up and say, maybe I got this wrong or I got that wrong, because I think that's learning that I want in my life, that every day I want to be better than the day before. So I do sort of let out my emotions sometimes on LeBron James and the Lakers and and Timberwolves and all of that. But I enjoy sport. I really enjoy sport. And you asked me a question recently. You said, Bish, when you come to work, sometimes are you sort of like, I don't know if it was tired or exhausted is the word or what the word was, but I don't think I've ever come to a cricket match, not one day since I've retired and gotten into broadcasting, where I didn't want to be there because I just love watching sport. And I don't do too many other things because when cricket is done, it's my family time.
Yeah.
That's it. And then I come back to my cricket. So I always enjoy the fact and cherish the fact that cricket is what I've loved since I was a child, and now to watch it and relate stories, there is no better job in the world for me than this. So every day is a fresh day and a chance to learn.
I find on days that I'm tired, or I find on days that I think I'm not there, that I tend to switch on late. I allow myself to switch on late. So if I'm doing the -10, the 10 minutes before the game starts, I'm ready with what I think with the rundown, but I only get in when I hear the count in my ear saying 30 seconds to go. And that is when I say, yeah, right, okay, that's me. Yeah, Bish, we could keep this going a long time. I'm very keen to know how you would react, because you've not been in that situation yet, with trolls on the internet, on social media. Who would you, for example, get affected if you knew that there were trolls who were going to be abusive with everything that you said? Because you're a sensitive human being. You're not someone who says, I don't care.
It's hard if it's happening over a prolonged or protracted period of time to say that it doesn't affect you. I mean, players often say they don't care what they see on social media, but it must affect them even if it's only for a minute, right? But I've learned, like being a cricketer and a batter, what to leave alone and to let it go. And learning through my Christianity and through my faith where my trust and my hope is, rather than trolls on social media. I'm still trying to understand why people troll people and abuse them the way that they do. I still, as a human,
very sad people.
Interested.
They're very sad people, Bish, because can you imagine getting up every morning and saying, right, who do I assault today? And my success lies in assaulting more people. I think they're very sad people. But you talked about players, you talked about broadcasters. Yes, increasingly you learn not to get affected by that. But it's impossible not to. But Bish also talked when he is home. We share that thing in common because people do not believe we are home. So this year, Bish started off going to Australia, did West Indies versus Australia. then did the under-19s. Didn't you? Was it the women? The under-19s.
Under-19s.
Then did the PSL.
Yeah.
Is now doing the IPL. Goes to the T20 World Cup. So sometimes I wonder if people do their schedules, the tournament schedules, based on when Bish is available.
I knew you would go there. Sometimes I get, my wife is the most understanding woman I've ever come across.
Where would we be without them, Bish? Where would we be?
She is implicitly trustworthy, knowing us since I was a teenager, and I trust her, she trusts me. So we've had some choppy times where, being away from home is not easy for her with kids. And you would understand this. The great Tony Cosia told me the same thing about regaling us with his stories of being a family man. But it's just, compartmentalizing to different formats of the game is a challenge. The one thing I'd say is I've continued to learn is talking in commentary. Sometimes I wish I would get the opportunity to speak less. I would love, Harsha, and you tease me about this all the time. I want to talk less, but sometimes the producer will just come in your ear and say, hello, you still there? The viewers are listening. And so then you'd have to explain stuff. But I am happiest when I'm able to sit back and watch the game, whether it's Test cricket, T20 cricket, for a few balls, for an over, and notice things that I may not necessarily have noticed if I were trying to tell a story. And so sitting in that third seat or second seat, sometimes I really do enjoy it because I get to see the game and to be able to pick things up from a different point of view.
I had promised myself that I will not get to remember the name, and I'm only getting there as a side effect. I want to ask you that separately one day, or maybe now, whether post remember the name, everyone expected you to come up with the box office line every time you went on air.
Yeah.
Did you find the need within yourself to come up with a box office line every time you were doing the closing stages of a match? Something that people like you and Ian Smith and the others are so good at. Did you get that pressure saying, oops, people will now expect me to come up with a line like that every time?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely for a while after that. Yes, and I must give credit to our good friend, mutual friend, Ajesh Ramachandran, who was he is one of the great teachers of broadcasting. Him and a guy called Hugh Bevan, who we both know as well.
Yes.
And they always talk about, Hugh always says, be disciplined in your broadcast. And what he means is that once the bowler starts running in, try to pause. Try to finish your story succinctly, Ajesh always says, but also try to be prepared for those moments. And you've taught this to many before. And what I've found now is the balance, try to get the balance between, if this situation occurs, I need to be prepared for what the possible outcome is, to articulate it. Not word for word, but knowing there are possible outcomes here, but also trying to invest myself in the moment. If, let's say, a Sanju Samson, who I have a great admiration for, coming to know Sanju, for example, as a person, I find myself a little bit more invested, and the emotion comes out naturally if he has success, for example, or failure. And that is a tight line where you don't want to be a fan of the player in that moment, but you want to be emotionally invested in the team or the player enough so that the viewer can feel that sense of that moment in reality.
Now, and I'll tell you now why I came towards the end of this program back to remember the name, because I've got this very strong belief. I'm not as deeply religious as Bish is, but I have a deep inner conviction that good things happen to good people, and that if you're good to people, good things will happen to you. And the reason I've brought that up into a broadcast is one of my happiest moments in broadcast was when our common friend Ajay Shamachandran suddenly said, you know Sachin better than anybody else. This is his farewell lap. I think you'll be able to capture the emotion well. So I'm on air. I got a lot of recognition for that so half an hour that was there. With me in the commentary box throughout that was Ian Bishop. Ian Bishop spoke one line, literally one line. I asked him something and he said, no, this is you because you understand the situation better. And in a sense, left that very high viewership moment away from himself and towards me. It's a broadcasting discipline that someone who understands the situation better gets to be on the air at that time. Not everyone practices that. And I remember thinking back when I sat down afterwards, I said, gee, that was large-hearted of Bish to do that. And then when Remember the Name came and I was watching and I said, why did Bish get to call that great moment? Because he let a moment go when he should have let a moment go and got the moment when he deserved to get the moment. So Bish, I will tell you this as we finish. Good things happen to good people. Remember the Name happened to you because you let something else go.
Oh.
So I hope that you will continue. You'll be in the broadcasting box many, many years after I've gone. But I hope you remain the person that you are. You will always remain the broadcaster that you are, but the person you are will determine the broadcaster you continue to be. So thanks, Bish. It's rare that a younger person's a role model, but in many ways, you're a role model for me as well.
Likewise, Harsha. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Bish.
Cheers.
We're going to be doing a lot of interesting things on this channel, so do subscribe. I look forward to hearing from you.